So today we are going to be talking about contracts. Um, we are going to actually be talking about the listing agreement. So last week, if you guys were here, Brittany spoke about how to get the listing appointment, how to get the listing appointment. And so today we're going to follow up on that with once you got the listing appointment, let's fill out the listing agreement and do the listing appointment. Have you guys done listings before?
No, I haven't. I'm a new agent.
Okay, cool. So this will be helpful to you.
Yes.
Good. We've got a bunch of people joining us right now, so we'll hold up for just a second. And again, if you guys are able to turn on your cameras, please do so. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. As I was saying, last week, Brittany covered how to get the listing in the first place. And so today we're going to take that to the contractual side of it, and we're going to talk about how to fill out the listing agreement once you have the listing appointment. So one of the things that we want to do when we get a listing appointment is there are some forms that we want to take with us in addition to the listing agreement. So whenever I do a listing appointment, first of all, I'm going to make sure that I'm asking the seller the pre-qualifying questions. Do you guys know why we ask the pre-qualifying questions from the seller?
Motivation.
We're going to find out what's motivating them to sell their house. And why is it important that we know what's motivating them?
Dates, times.
Say that again. Greg.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, because it helps me understand what kind of dates we're talking about, what kind of prices, and how aggressive to price the actual listing.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Ernie?
I was going to say to set expectations.
Yep. All of those things, right? Because depending on what their motivation is, we might have a completely different strategy that we use to sell their house if they need to sell it quickly or if they're not as motivated. And also, once we get into the actual once we get under contract and we're in escrow, things are going to come up, and it's good to know their motivation, because then if they get upset with the buyer or they get upset with the timeline or whatever, we can take them back to that motivation of why they wanted to sell and what was important to them in the first place, because sometimes our clients forget that with all of the things that are going on in a transaction, because a transaction can be very stressful for a buyer or a seller. So that's why we want to ask, that's one of the reasons we want to ask the pre-listing questions. Another reason that we want to ask them is because usually we are going to come up with a price range of what we think that they should list their house at, and we're going to do it before we even get to their house. And that was something that kind of blew my mind in the beginning when I first became a realtor, because I was like, how in the world am I supposed to tell somebody what their home is worth if I've never even been inside their house, right? Now I understand how that works. But by asking those pre-listing questions, we can find out or get a general idea of the condition of their home. Have they done any updates to it? What does their kitchen look like? What kind of tile does the kitchen have? What's, one of their favorite features about the house? What do they not like about the house? Those kinds of things give us information. And so once we have that information, then we want to do a CMA. And a CMA is a comparative market analysis. And that's where we're pulling the comps and we're seeing what other homes have sold. And that's how we're coming up with a range of value for their home. And so when you have that range, okay, if I go in and I see this house and the house is completely remodeled and redone, then we're going to maybe price it at the top of that range, right? But if we go in and the house smells and it's got stained carpet and there's like all these things, then we might price it at the lower end of whatever our range is, right? And when we're looking at the homes that we're going to use as the comps, it's a good idea to know, okay, if the house that we are comping has tile countertops, then when we're looking at the comps, then we know, okay, this might be more of a comp to the house than this other one that's completely remodeled, or vice versa. But I'm going to prepare a CMA and I'm going to take that with me to the listing appointment. I'm also going to prepare a seller net sheet. And a seller net sheet, I'm actually going to reach out to escrow and have them prepare the seller net sheet for me. And that's going to give me an idea of, or that's going to allow me to show the seller, okay, this is, if we sell your house for X amount of dollars, and then we subtract out the escrow fees and the commission fees, whatnot, this is what you can expect to walk away with. It's definitely just a rough number. The real numbers will be determined once we're under contract, but also at the time that I'm preparing the seller net sheet, I don't still not necessarily know what we're going to price the house at, right? But it's still pretty easy. So if I do the seller net sheet for $550 and we end up pricing the house at $570, it might not be that we can add that $20,000 directly to the bottom line, but it gives the seller a general idea. And then afterwards, I can go back and complete a new seller net sheet if I need to. The other thing that we want to take with us to the listing appointment is we want to take in our head our objection handlers. So when we go to a listing appointment, we want to anticipate, and part of the way we anticipate this is through that seller questionnaire. When we ask them those pre-listing questions, what objections are they going to have? And so I want to walk in prepared with objection handlers, because when I'm talking to them, like let's say I'm talking to them on the phone and I set up the appointment and I ask them those questions, I'm not going to handle any objections on the phone. I'm going to say, you know what, that's a great question, and we'll discuss that when we meet. And then I know what I need to come prepared for in regards to the objections. The other thing I'm going to take with me to a listing appointment is I'm going to take the listing agreement. Now, most of the forms during a transaction will get signed electronically, depending on who your client is. Some like to do everything by hand, but most people do it electronically. But the listing agreement, I take that printed out so that I can sit there when I'm sitting at the table with them, have them physically sign that, because I want them to sign that before I leave the listing appointment, if at all possible. Two other things that I take with me to the listing appointment is I will take the two of the disclosures. I'm going to take the the TDS and the SPQ, the seller property questionnaire, and then the transfer disclosure statement. The reason I take those is because those are the two that they have to mark all the boxes, yes or no, and really give the history of what's happened in their house. And I feel like those are easier to fill out by hand than they are electronically. I will take them and I will leave them after they sign the listing agreement, and then I'll get those from them later. If they want to sign them electronically instead, I definitely give them that option, but I'm still going to leave that paperwork so that they can get familiar with the questions. Sometimes I think when it's done electronically, they go through it just a little bit too fast, and so I prefer those to be done by hand if at all possible. So that's what I take with me to the—
What's the other one? The TDS and the other, what is it?
The SPQ.
SPQ.
Yep.
Okay.
The seller property questionnaire. And when I get those back, I'm reviewing them. I'm glancing through it, making sure anything they marked yes on, that they've also put an explanation, and making sure that they didn't leave any blanks. There was not a question that they didn't answer, because it's important that those are completely filled out. So let me go ahead and share my screen, because I'm going to show you guys how to do the listing, fill out the listing contract. So the first thing that I do when I have a client is I start with the cover sheet. And the cover sheet is 4 pages of information, and the majority of that information we do not need to fill out. So I'm just going to fill out the key pieces of information. And by doing so, this will transfer over to all of the contract paperwork that we'll end up using. And I'll show you that in just a minute. So since we're doing a listing appointment, we don't have any buyer information at this point, so that all gets blank. And then here's our seller information. So for our purposes here, we're going to sell a house for Donald Duck. I like to check this box right here that just puts an X next to where they're supposed to sign an initial, just my preference. And then I'm going to also put Donald's email address, because that's another piece of information I'm going to need, but I don't need their address, their phone number. Like for our contracts, I don't need that at all. If there's a Daisy Duck, then I would put her in seller number 2. If there are more than 2 sellers, then I would have to use an additional signature addendum. But in this case, we just have Donald that's selling the house and he owns it by himself. And then we're going to put some basic information about the house. So we're going to put the address, 123 Love This House Drive, located in Tulare. I've got the assessor parcel number. If you know the dashes, where the dashes go on your APN, be sure to put those, because it just helps reduce errors when somebody's, retyping that number. I'm leaving the listing date and listing price blank for right now, because I can fill that out when I get to the appointment. So very basic information I'm filling out here. It is a residential property, so I went ahead and marked that. And then I've got places here for escrow information, the buyer's information. We don't know anything about the buyer yet. Let me see. Buyer's broker, we don't know anything about them, but we know who we are. So I'm going to fill out the seller's broker information. I would actually put the address here. So let me just get that really quick. And I've got my office's DRE number, and I've got my DRE number, and then my name and my email. I would also put the phone numbers. And then my phone number. Okay. And then I'm not going to put any lender information, no appraisal information. I've got title information here, but actually I wouldn't even have that there. None of this information I'm filling out. So it's just those few pieces of information. Then I'm going to save that. And when I come over to my actual listing agreement here, residential listing agreement, you can open it in Classic Edition or the new form editor. I like the Classic Edition, so I'm going to open it there. But if you get in here and open it and see it looks a little bit different, it's because it might be opening in the other edition. Okay, so anytime we have a listing agreement or a purchase agreement, it's automatically going to add some additional forms. And I'm not really going to talk about those forms today, because I just want to mainly talk about the listing agreement, but it's going to put in this disclosure regarding agency. State of California takes agency very seriously. And so anytime you have them sign something, even if they're signing like the buyer rep agreement, it's still going to attach this form to it. So there's a chance that your client might sign this form more than once during the transaction, but it's not not a big deal. And so this just kind of talks about, the buyers and sellers, agents' responsibilities, and who's representing who. There's a fair housing and discrimination advisory that's included here. There's the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller, which means that as an agent, you are not the only seller that I'm going to possibly be representing, and I might be representing multiple buyers. Talks about dual agency, and everybody's going to sign this one. There's a wire fraud and electronic funds transfer advisory, which is something that I always be sure to point out to my clients and just let them know if they ever receive an email from escrow or title that's asking them to wire money, to take a minute, make a phone call, verify that it is a legitimate request. And when they make that phone call, not to make it from the number that's included in that email, because if it's a scam email, it's also going to be a scam number. We have had people, you know, lose money because of this type of thing. So I always just take a moment and point that out. And then we get to the listing agreement. One thing I wanted to point out on all of these agreements, every once in a while, the agreements will be updated, or the contracts and forms will be updated. And you can always look in the bottom corner right here. This was last revised in June of 2023. So that way I know I've got, you know, the most recent form here. All right. So you can see that the information that I had put on the cover sheet did carry over and auto-filled on my form. And that's the reason I use the cover sheet, because it simplifies things, because it'll autofill on every form that I add to the transaction. And so we've got date prepared. So the date prepared is today because I'm preparing it today. It doesn't matter when they sign this or when they want to actually put their home on the market. The date prepared is simply the date prepared. There will be other forms in the transaction that will reference back, like maybe it's an addendum that gets attached, you know, to the listing agreement. And it's going to ask, you know, what form and dated. It'll say dated. This is the date that ends up going on any of those other forms that come, you know, in the future. So not when they sign it or anything like that, but actually when it was dated. So 9/18. So this is between Donald Duck. Donald Duck is employing Keller Williams Realty Tulare County. So they're not actually employing me. They're employing Keller Williams. And so this is agreement between the seller and my broker, and I have the authority to sign on behalf of my broker. So I've got a beginning date. And so when I do a listing agreement, obviously I'm asking, you know, when are they ready to put it on the market? And I'm making sure that there's time in there for me to do the things that I need to do. So I need to hire a professional photographer. I need to make sure that I've got time to get my sign in their yard. I need to, you know, do the different things. And so, and when I'm sitting with them, I don't necessarily know my photographer's schedule. So I've got to make sure that, you know, we're going out enough days from that. And sometimes you want to be strategic. You know, do you want to start the listing right before the weekend? Do you want to start it on a Monday? Whatever works for the buyer. And so in this case, I'm going to go ahead and say, let's start it on Friday. So it's dated the 18th, but the beginning date of the agreement is going to be September 22nd. And we have to have an end date, because if we don't have an end date, then it's not a valid contract. I like to do my listing agreements for 6 months. So that would be October, November, December, January, February, March. And I always end my contracts on the last day of the month. Does anyone know why I do it on the last day of the month?
Because if you extend it, it's easy to start at the first day of the month.
Sort of. What I like about the last day of the month is if I end up, you know, super busy and I've got multiple listings or multiple agreements, whatever, I know that I only have to check to see if I have any expiring contracts on the last day of any given month. If I date this so it expires March 22nd, and then the next one expires, you know, whatever month on the 17th, and then I got one that expires on the 6th, it can become, you know, harder to keep track of, right? Now, I always recommend that when you take a listing, that you grab your calendar and you put that listing end date in your calendar, and maybe even put it, you know, a week or two before. Make a note that, you know, such and such is going to be expiring soon. Now, hopefully we've got the home sold way before 6 months, but, you know, you never know. And so that last day of the month is good for just tracking. So we're going to sell 123 Love This House Drive. It's located in the city of Tulare, the county of Tulare, got the zip code, got the APN number. And then if it's a manufactured mobile home, I would mark this box. If it's being sold as part of, probate or something like that, then I would mark this box. But that's not happening in this transaction. And if we mark these boxes, then that brings other forms into this transaction, because there are forms that are specific to, a mobile home, specific to probate, etc. And so this is basically how I'm going to show up to the listing appointment with this printed out, with this information already filled out. I might not have the beginning dates filled out yet, because I'm going to talk to them and see, what makes sense for them. And then we come to the price. So how much are we going to price this house for? And then this is where I'm going to, show the CMA. We're going to have the discussion, and then the seller's going to determine what price they want to list it for, based off of, what advice I gave them. So in this example, we'll price it for $800,000. And so I would hand write this while I was there, and then I would have them just initial whatever I hand write. For listing terms, I usually leave that blank. There's not anything I usually need to put in there, because the listing terms are usually, the other lines here will take care of it. The other thing that I usually have filled out
Lori,
yes.
Question real quick. So, say that you're discussing the price and your seller insists on selling it for a higher price than what you suggested.
Mm-hmm.
And you wanted to make an arrangement for, if we don't get any offers or no interest in 2 weeks or 12 days, we're going to lower it to what I wanted it to. Is that where you put that?
Yeah, you could definitely put that there.
Okay.
You could definitely put that there.
Okay.
And just because you have that there doesn't necessarily mean that they have to do it, but it's in writing and it's there. And so it gives you.
It's just sort of setting precedent, saying, okay, well, this is what I'm suggesting. If we don't get any offers or interest in, then we're going to drop it and see if they can do that.
Yes. So on number A here, this is where we're going to talk about our compensation. And again, it's compensation to the broker, not compensation to us, which is why when, at the end of it, the checks get cut to the broker and not actually to us. We do get, a check for part of it. So this is where we're going to put the percentage of the commission that we're going to get. So in my market center, our goal is to get 6%. So I'm going to put 6% there. And what this says is seller agrees to pay to broker 6% of the listing price. If I get there, and so we don't recommend, lowering the commission, but if I get there and for whatever reason I end up lowering the commission, I can cross that out and I can lower the commission. But by having the 6% there, if nothing else, that shows that I'm giving them a deal if it happens to go that way. But remember, we're going to take our objection handlers with us. And so when commission comes up, we're going to handle that objection so that we can keep this at 6%. So right now the seller's going to pay 6% to sell their house. And we have the option, we could put a flat price. Do you guys know when we would put a flat dollar amount instead of a percentage?
I know some of the new sellers do that, or new properties.
Okay. Where I like to use it is if I'm doing something that's low price. So if I'm doing a piece of land that is, maybe only $50,000, or if I'm doing a mobile home that's only $80,000, I'm not really interested in making 3% of $50,000, right? So in that case, we're actually going to charge them a higher commission than what the standard commission amount is. So I might put a flat dollar amount right there. So if the commission works out where it's like, oh, I'm only going to make, $1,000 off of this. No, I'm going to make 2,500 or whatever, whatever it might be. So that's when I might put a flat amount there. But it could be, lots of different things. So Ernie, if you're seeing, the newer ones doing that, I don't know if they're making more or less by doing that, probably less, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's it's just the new builders. It might be even the buyer commissions coming in that they just have a flat rate.
Okay.
Or if like the new development down the street, if I bring a buyer in,
Mhm.
they're offering just a flat rate instead of a percentage.
Okay, all right. That's interesting because in my area, they're still offering a percentage, but real estate is very local. And so you got to keep that in mind when you attend something like this, is that sometimes there are local differences. And so one of the local differences that I started to mention earlier is, so they're going to pay 6%, and some agents will put in like a $400 transaction fee. So not only are you going to pay your percentage, but they're going to pay that transaction fee that Keller Williams charges us as well. Now, if you do this, then you want to make sure that you're putting only what you're being charged. Like, you can't make extra money off of this. So if I'm being charged $400, I can't make them pay $600, right? The other thing is, so that you don't get in trouble or with discrimination, if you do it for one client, you have to do it for every single client, no exceptions. Now, in my market center, it's not common to have that. And I feel like personally, I make enough money with that 6% that that's just part of my cost of doing business. But if you ask 10 different agents, you might get 10 different, well, probably not 10 different answers on that, but you'll get different thoughts. So then we get into some of the terms of the contract. And so right here, this is saying that we get paid that if during the listing period that we procure a ready, willing, able buyer who puts in an offer on the price and puts in an offer on the home and the seller accepts it. Now, something that's interesting here, and remember, we are reputation-based businesses. So sometimes there's things in the contract that we're not necessarily going to hold our clients to, just because it's bad for our reputation to do this. But one of the things here, it says that so the commission is earned provided the buyer completes the transaction or is prevented from doing so by seller. Broker is entitled to compensation whether any escrow resulting from such offer closes during or after the expiration or any extension. So basically what this is saying is that if we bring a buyer and then the seller refuses to sell it to them, we are still eligible for that commission. We had one not too long ago where the seller, we went under contract, did the whole 30 days, and on the last day, the seller decided, I'm not selling the house, and refused to sell it. So now the buyer's taken the seller to court to get compensation or force him to sell or whatever it is. But in that case, we still are eligible for that commission if we go after it. And again, we is the broker. Michelle, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just back on the transaction fee for the office. When you said it's discrimination, if you put it on one, you need to put it on everyone. Is that something, and I know it's different for everyone how they handle that. So I'm just questioning, if you put that on your contract and then you agree to the potential seller, like, don't worry about it, I'll pay for that. I don't want that to be a stumbling block in getting this contract. Does that become an issue, or do we still have the right to decide how we want to handle that fee?
So I don't know, but I've been told that if you do it for one, you have to do it for all. So I would say that you would have to do it for all. If you wanted to give them a $400 credit for some other reason that offset that might be something you could do. That would be more of a question for your broker.
Okay.
To see what they say, because I don't want to give you, incorrect advice there.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I would say on the other end too, though, if you got into the situation to where you're discounting your commission, you can discount the commission, but say, but you got to pay for this transaction fee. So like, I mean, like you said, if I'm getting 6, I'm not going to charge them a transaction fee. That's counting pennies. But if they're going to sit there and barter and say, oh no, I'm going to only give you 4%, then you say, okay, then you got to at least pay the transaction fee. So that's a different scenario where you put that in.
And what I would do there, because up here, let me see. Okay. So you have to be careful with that, Ernie, because in that case, you're then charging that $400 fee or whatever it is to only some clients. And
Right.
your thinking is perfectly, right there. Okay, if I'm discounting my commission, then you're going to pay that fee, but you have to charge that fee to everybody. So, again, maybe a question for the broker.
Right.
But you bring up a really good point. Martin, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Since we're mentioning these other fees, I've heard of the transaction coordinator's fee also being paid for by the buyers if you're on the buyer side. Is that something you put on here, or do you?
So this is a listing agreement, so it wouldn't be on this form because this is specific to sellers. But if you're doing the buyer rep agreement, then you would put it on there.
So if you have a transaction coordinator for the seller side, I mean, you would put it on here, right?
Okay, yes. So you could add that there as well. The $400 fee for the transaction, and then another, whatever for the transaction coordinator. You could do one, you could do both. So yes, but you have to make sure that you're not exceeding your actual cost on that.
Right, you're not adding anything else to it, to
Yeah.
whatever they charge you. Got it.
Yeah. My personal opinion, though, is that if the seller's paying, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 in commission, I feel like I can pay a $400, fee, even if I'm only getting half of that commission. But different agents do it different ways, and it's more common in some market centers than others. So,
Okay, thank you. That makes sense.
yeah. I mean, that $400 or $800, however you want to look at it, if you do 10 transactions, you're talking about $4,000 or $8,000. So it definitely adds up. And it'd be nice to take home an extra $8,000 than not, but personal choice on how you want to do that.
Can't you also write that off though? Isn't that a business expense?
Yeah, it's a business expense. Yeah.
So what about, so is this where you put, like, I mean, there's some guys in here that are doing, like, they're itemizing their photos and they're staging. Is this where you put that as well?
So if you're charging them for that, you can put it here, or there's a couple of other places that you can put it. And I'll show you the photo thing in just a minute.
And I don't agree with it.
Yeah.
Myself. I mean, like I said, if I'm getting the decent percentage on, that should be included in everything that, as far as my services, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that's my feeling too. It's the cost of doing business is that, but different people have different feelings on it. And that could be one of your selling points too. I provide free professional photos, or, whatever the case might be. As far as staging,
yeah,
I don't know.
You're getting into a little bit more money there. So
yeah, exactly. Okay, so then we come down here to, we're still in compensation, and we're going to come to 3A2. So we can leave this blank, but I'm usually putting 30 calendar days in here or something to that effect. And basically what this is saying is that at the end of the listing agreement or any extension, if Mr. Seller, if you sell the house to somebody who came in and looked at it, or somebody who, previously like wrote an offer or something, I still earn that commission while we had this listing agreement. And so if that happens within the next 30 days, then you still owe us the commission. But the caveat there is that you have to give the seller written notice of the names of anyone that you believe you would still earn the commission on.
that would be anybody that came in to see the house while you were listing it. Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
potentially, yes.
Your open house lists and.
Yeah, so you'd have to keep, and that's one of the things is, when somebody wants to come and see the house, I get the broker's name. I get the agent's name. I don't get their client's name, and you'd have to have their client's name in order to do that. But I've never been in the situation where I've had to do that, but I'm at least putting 30 days and reserving that right to do it. Because if you leave it blank, then you don't have the right to do it.
That's what I was thinking. 30 days isn't long enough.
I mean, and it might not be. You could put whatever you want in there.
Okay.
I would suggest 30 days at a minimum.
Yeah.
And then this says that if without the broker's written consent, the property is withdrawn from the sale and it's leased or rented or whatever by a voluntary act of the seller, then you still earned your commission. So basically, this is saying if the seller changes their mind and without your permission, they still owe you the commission. Okay, so on number C here, I always write in, and I make it fit on this line, so that's why it's not like a complete sentence. But in addition, seller agrees to pay broker reimburse cost of professional photos only if seller cancels agreement. So I'm gonna pay the professional photos up front, but then if the seller changes their mind, if I'm not making no money on this sale, I want you to reimburse me for what I put out. And so I always add that to my my contract there. And then down here on D, this is where we're taking that 6% that we put at the top, and we're determining how much of that 6% are we offering to the buyer's broker. And so the seller is fully aware of how much we're keeping and how much we're offering to the buyer. I usually split that, and so 3% goes to them, or if it's a certain dollar amount, it would go there. Any questions on that part? All right. Here it says seller irrevocably assigns to broker the above compensation from seller's funds and proceeds in escrow. That means that the seller can't go under escrow and then change their mind on the amount of the commission because they've irrevocably assigned those amounts to the broker. Seller represents that seller has not previously entered into a listing agreement with another broker regarding the property unless specified as below, as follows. So if they've, we want to make sure if we're taking a listing that they don't already have a listing agreement with someone else. And that could happen. Let's say they sign a 1-year listing agreement, right? And then they decide, you know what, I don't like this agent, so I want to cancel it, but they don't actually cancel it. They just withdraw it from the market, but it's still a valid listing agreement. The buyer might not even, the seller might not even realize that because they're not in the industry and they don't understand the differences, and they might think that it's completely done. And so by asking this question, they can say, oh, well, you know what, we had it listed with so-and-so, but we don't have that anymore. But then that gives you the opportunity to look in the MLS, see what's actually happening with the property, which you would look in the MLS anyways when you have a listing. And then here, this is them warranting that they have no obligation to pay compensation to any other broker regarding the property unless the property is transferred to any of the following individuals or entities. And this is where if they had gotten this list up here, so if the escrow canceled, but within 30 or 60 days, the other broker still gets compensation, this is where they would put those people's names or attach that list.
So how does an agent get, if they want to fire an agent? They've got a listing and they want to get out of that contract with them.
So they would talk to the listing agent or the broker, and it would have to be mutual.
Mm-hmm.
And so as long
paper for that or signature?
Yes, there's a cancellation of listing form.
Okay.
And
so
with that,
if somebody told you you're filling this out with somebody and they said, well, yeah, I had a listing, or you found out you had a listing, then you'd have to ask them if they have that signed, or have them tell them that they have to sign it before we proceed any further.
Yeah, which if they have a valid listing with another agent, we shouldn't be talking to them anyways.
Right.
And there's different statuses in the MLS. So like a property can be put on hold, it can be withdrawn, or it can be canceled, or it can expire. And a seller doesn't necessarily know the differences between those categories. I mean, heck, a lot of agents don't know the differences between those categories. And so that's where by asking these questions, you're gathering information, and then you can do additional research if you need to on it.
Right. Right. So if you get to this point and they say, oh yeah, we had a list, and you find out, whoa, so they've got to go handle that before you can proceed.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, any other questions on this part? So going back for just a second. So this part right here, so for example, if the seller was under contract with another agent, the agent, and then that contract, was canceled, but the agent reserved the right to earn the compensation if somebody who came into the house, ends up buying it, and then they give them that list. That list has a few names. Like, so here they would put, well, if I sell it to Joe Smith or Jane Jones or whoever, then at that point, this other broker earns that commission. Then you want to make sure if you accept any offers, it's not from Joe Smith or Jane Jones, right? So that's what that line there would be for. Okay. And it says that you're not, if you're not entitled to compensation because of those reasons, you're also not obligated to represent the seller in the transaction. So nobody here is making you work for free if Joe Smith comes in and puts in an offer.
I've heard instances on that to where you can you contact the other agent if these people came back to buy it and ask to say, hey, give them a referral fee.
Yeah, you could do that. Depends on, what all parties agree to.
Unless they can say, no, I want it all.
Yeah, they can say I want it all. Because they've reserved the right through the terms of the contract, they've reserved that right. But if they want it all, they've got to do the work, because no one's saying that just because you have a listing agreement, you have to do the work, but you don't get paid for it.
Right.
So you'd want to just make sure that whatever agreement you have with the other agent, that you're putting that in writing. Okay. And then we're going to come to this section 4, where we're identifying what items do they want to have included and what items do they want to have excluded. And so they might, have different things here. Maybe they want to exclude the refrigerator and the chandelier. I know I've spelled that wrong, so.
IER.
IER? Well, anyways, it's good enough. Okay, so we're going to exclude the refrigerator and the chandelier.
Well, that's right.
So right here it says that seller intends that the above items be excluded or included in offering the property for sale, but understands that the purchase agreement supersedes any intention expressed above and will ultimately determine which items are excluded and included in the sale, and broker is not responsible for and does not guarantee that the above exclusions or inclusions will be in the purchase agreement. So basically, this is identifying what their intention is. So they intend to keep the refrigerator and they intend to keep the chandelier. Now, my recommendation, if they want to keep that chandelier, is take it down now and put up a different light fixture. Do it before we take the photos, do it before any buyers come into the house and see it. But sometimes that doesn't happen. And obviously that's not going to happen with the refrigerator, right? So what you want to do is you want to put in the MLS and the agent notes that the seller reserves the refrigerator and the chandelier. But even that doesn't really count for anything. What counts for something is when we get an offer, we have to make sure that those items are excluded. So if I'm representing a buyer and I'm putting in an offer and in the agent notes it says that the refrigerator and chandelier are excluded, I'm going to specifically put that on the purchase agreement so that all parties know what the intentions of the sellers were, right? But if I'm representing the seller and I get an offer and it doesn't have those items excluded, then I've got to do a counter offer. And in that counter offer, I have to make sure that everybody understands there's no refrigerator and no chandelier. Which is why if I'm representing the buyer, I'm just writing that in there to try to avoid that counter offer step because I want my offer accepted, you know, sooner than later. And so the other thing that I do, so when I'm representing a seller and I have this, and no matter if I've been on the market for a week or 3 months, when we get an offer and we're getting ready to accept the offer, I pull this listing agreement out and I look and see what were the intentions of the seller. So we had this a few months ago where on the additional items excluded was the water softener system. And when we got an offer, everybody forgot about the water softener system. This wasn't mine, but everybody forgot about it. The seller forgot about it. The agent forgot about it. Buyer didn't even know about it. So we go under agreement. They go under agreement, under contract. And then we remember, oh, wait, that water softener system. So immediately they go back to the buyer and they say, hey, the water softener system was not supposed to be included. But all of a sudden buyer's like, nope, we want it. Buyer probably didn't even realize that the water softener system even existed when they put in the offer. But all the different ways that were tried, the buyer stood firm that they wanted that water softener system. And so when the transaction closed, the agent ended up buying the seller a water softener system for their new house, which cost about $1,200. All because they didn't look back on this form and say, oh yeah, they wanted the water softener system excluded. Now they didn't have to do that because, you know, there's this line right here that says it's the seller's responsibility to make sure that it's included, but they felt bad about it. The agent felt bad. The agent felt like it was their fault. Client was a family friend and client was both buying and selling. So try not to get in that situation. And then we're going to ask them about any items that are leased or liened or not owned. And we want to put that here. Now, sometimes, and I think it says it some here, there's like a PACE loan that were real popular there for a while. And so you might, even though it doesn't like specifically say it here, I feel like it used to say it here, ask them if there's any PACE loans that they have. So I had a client, a seller that had a PACE loan and it was attached to their property taxes. So every year when they paid their property taxes, they paid higher because they were paying off this PACE loan that they have got like $24,000 worth of like energy efficient windows or something. And so that had to be paid off during, you know, escrow. But it'd be easy for a seller to forget that they even had that. And in case, you know, it should come up on title, but in case it doesn't, you know. And then there's a special question here about smart home features. So any smart home, you know, devices, are they going to be included in the sale or excluded from the sale? And then we have the option to put that there. Any questions on that? All right, then we start talking about the multiple listing service. So this explains what the MLS is, and it identifies what MLS you are a subscriber, you as the agent. So I live in Tulare County, I'm part of the Tulare County MLS. I'm also part of Kings County and I'm also part of Kern County, but the property that we're selling is in Tulare County, so I only need to write Tulare County here. But if the property was, let's say, in Fresno County, and I'm not a member of Fresno County, then I would have to check this box that states that the MLS that I'm a member of is not the primary MLS for the geographic area of the property. So what that would mean is that if I don't join the Fresno MLS when I take this listing, this property will not be listed in the Fresno MLS. It'll be listed on realtor.com and Zillow and all of those, but not the actual MLS. And this is a pet peeve of mine when people don't belong to the MLS where the property is, because as agents, that's the system that I use. And I hate it when a client says, well, what about this house? And I wasn't aware of that house because it's showing up on Zillow and I don't use Zillow, right? So, you know, or whatever other site. So anyways, this is where we're going to let them know what MLS we are part of and whether or not that's the primary one that the property is located in. Then they're gonna have to initial this part right here. You initial it and they initial it. And this just talks about the benefits of using the MLS or opting out, because they can opt out of it if they don't want to be in the MLS. I'm not quite sure why people would do that other than maybe privacy reasons, but it really impacts, you know, the exposure to their house if they do. Even on this, somewhere in here, it says that even if they, like right here, impact of opting out of the MLS. If you opt out of the MLS, it still might, and maybe it's down here where it's some of the different features of the MLS. It's not all, so like when you put it in the MLS, it goes out to like 300 different other websites. And so if you opt out of certain features of the MLS, those other websites might not have that feature opt out, and so it might still show up in their MLS, in their on their websites. But here, the clear cooperation policy just states that the MLS rules either require or do not require that property be listed in the MLS within 1 business day of any public marketing. This explains what public marketing is. So flyers, window signs, yard signs, digital marketing, all those things. Here it talks about coming soon status. I don't know a lot about coming soon status because my broker doesn't allow us to use that. But if you do something with coming soon, make sure you know what your MLS rules are and make sure you know what your broker policy is. Right here, seller instructs broker. This is where you can identify what day that you want, that the seller wants you to begin publicly marketing it. So our agreement starts on the 22nd. And so if they want us to start publicly marketing it on the 22nd, then we can just leave this blank because it automatically defaults to that. But if they want us to wait a couple days beyond that or whatever, then we could put a specific date in here. But just know that if you don't start marketing it on the date of the agreement, it's a good possibility that the days on market will start counting. And so when you actually do put it on the market, it might already show that it's got 7 days on market when in actuality, it's the first day on the market. So those are some things to talk over with the seller. The only exception to that is if we're not marketing it to the public, we can still market it within our own local office. Like, so we can tell other agents in our office about it. We just can't tell the public about it. And so here's where it talks about what's going to be on the internet and then the feature opt-outs. And so that's what I was talking about. There might be some features that you can opt out of on your MLS, but Zillow or another site might still show those features. And then talks about brokers and sellers duties. So, you know, and here it talks about on number B, when are we presenting the offers? Are we going to present them as soon as they come in, or are we going to wait until a specific day to present them? And just because we present them on, you know, if we present them as they come in, that doesn't mean that the seller has to make a decision on that day. We can still present them as they come in, and then we'll make a decision the following Monday or whatever it might be. But this gives you an opportunity to have that discussion with the seller. It talks here about the buyer supplemental offer letters, which are basically those love letters. we are not really supposed to present those anymore because it opens the seller up to discrimination, but they actually have a choice here on whether they want you to present them or not. And so, you'd want to have that discussion with them. Here's where, if they were going to do any reports. So Ernie, I think you asked earlier, about staging, or would you ask about staging or something else?
Yeah, it was just the
the TC fees.
Added cost.
Okay. And so if there's some reports that they're going to do right here, the seller's agreeing within 5 days to order these reports. I usually leave this blank. If they want to order it, they can. But if you specifically discuss that they're going to do a roof inspection, then you can mark that here. And this contractually obligates them to doing it within, 5 days or whatever the case might be. And then here it talks about agency relationships, which,
real quick, what's beneficial? Yeah. I mean, is it beneficial to the seller to do a lot of that stuff before discovery because I mean, they don't pay for all of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's up to the seller what they want to do. There are some market centers where it's very common for the seller to pay for the home inspection report and some of the other reports before the listing goes active. My market center, that's not common at all.
I mean, homeowners documents for sure, because that would
speed things up. Yeah. So, it's just optional. There might be specific reasons why they would pay for one of these things or not. And then again, whatever's common in your market center.
Okay.
So here on number 12, so let's talk about 11 really quick. Deposit. Broker is authorized to accept and hold on seller's behalf any deposits to be applied towards the purchase price. Even though it says that, don't do that. We don't want to hold any money at all. Money should not pass through our hands at all. My broker, that's like a huge, huge, huge no-no. So don't do that. And then agency relationships, we had that whole disclosure at the very beginning of this agreement, but this is how serious state of California takes agency. They've got it here again. So it's talking about that. It's talking about like insurance and security, audio, video, basically saying that the broker's not responsible for anything that happens, that buyers might come on and take video and take photos. Buyers could come on and steal stuff. So, or they could get hurt. So definitely make sure you have insurance. So that's what that's pretty much talking about. This number 15 authorizes you to put a lockbox on the property. Here, if it's a tenant occupied property, then you have to get the tenant's permission for the use of a lockbox, and then there's a special form that you can use that they give their permission. You have to get authorization to put a for sale sign on the property. And then there was another thing here. I passed it up when I was talking about it, but basically on here, it does say that offers are not confidential. I'm not going to spend time looking for it, but it probably says it right here somewhere. But basically it says that the seller authorizes that you as an agent can disclose that you have other offers and even what the offer price is. There's a lot of agents that don't believe that that's true, that offers are confidential and you can't share that information. But in the contract, it specifically gives you permission to do that. I don't get into an argument with those agents, but a lot of agents don't realize that. So then it talks about, mediation, arbitration. It says that this is the entire agreement. Talks about who the authorized signers are. If it's an entity, like it's probate or an LLC or something like that, then there's an extra section to fill out here. Or you can use a completely different form to, put that information in there, and then the seller signs it, you sign it, and then that is the listing agreement. And so that's 6 pages that are the actual listing agreement. And then it's got the seller advisory that talks about, a bunch of different things that the seller should know. And then there's the Consumer Privacy Act advisory And then that's the end of what's known as the listing agreement. Any questions on that? No questions? You guys are all ready to go out and get listings, have them fill out the contract? Here's what I recommend, 2 things. One is if you haven't filled out one before, I recommend that you just fill out one. You can do it on your own house or you could do it on Donald Duck's house, however you prefer. It's good practice. You should also read through it and know exactly what it says. And even though I've read through them before, when I was preparing this class, I read through it again because, you know, you forget what you read, and we always want to know what our clients are signing and be prepared to answer, you know, any questions that they might have. Michelle?
Hi, Lori. Quick question. So, I have a client that is going to list his house on the contingent of selling because he's purchasing, on the contingent of a rent back. He's going to rent, he wants to rent back his house. There's a new housing development, a house being built that he's going to purchase. The thing about that is upon that purchase, he doesn't know when the exact, nobody knows when the exact date that house will be ready for him to move into. So how could you word in a listing that we don't know the exact date of how long he needs to rent back, but how would you handle that?
So in the listing agreement, the exact wording isn't super important because the only one that's really going to see the listing agreement is you, the seller, and the broker. And so, you know, any potential buyer is going to have no clue what the listing agreement says. So you want to put something in there. And again, that serves as the intention and it serves as a reminder when you accept an agreement. When you accept an agreement, there's a completely different form that you're going to fill out that, you know, protects his ability to, and it might be, you could either do it as the rent back for, you know, until his next property closes, or you could do it as a contingency that the property has to close before you close escrow. So there's different ways to do that. I'd be happy to talk to you about that. But for the purposes of this right here, we are at 12:32. I don't want to keep you guys over. And so with that, I just want to say thank you guys for attending. And Michelle, if you want to hold on for just a minute, I'll talk to you. But thank you guys for attending and participating and asking questions, and go get a listing.